and he's a registered Republican, and he wasn't trying to make a political film, but he did.
It's almost, in a weird way, it's almost like a reverse Hangover.
It's got to be like Freudian or, pre-Freudian. It's a haunted house movie in space.
Welcome back. We're at our home away from home in Columbus, Ohio, the Gateway Film Center for our monthly Fright Club Live, and it's going to be a fun one. She is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And we are from madwolf.com. Welcome to Fright Club Live. We are talking about sci-fi. We are talking about horror. We are talking about the best of both worlds.
That's right. That is the plan.
And we're going to watch a real fun one tonight that I don't think many people have seen, and it's going to be great because I think they're going to like it a lot.
I do, too, and I think it's a really super fun movie to watch with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
As
things
I'm
get
looking
nutty.
forward to it.
And things definitely do get nutty. But we got some exciting news actually to talk about, especially considering
I'm so
that
proud of us for not saying anything before now.
I know. We were just talking to Nathan here in the crowd. He said, "You guys kept this under wraps."
We did.
So we might as well just spill it if you haven't heard it on the interwebs or following us on social. Here at the Gateway Film Center, they have announced the Horror 101 program, and I'll tell you what, if you're a horror fan, and if I know you are because you're here. You are going to love this. It follows up their Cult 101 they did last year.
Right, which was awesome. It was
huge,
cool.
Huge hit. So now they've polled a lot of people, including the two of us, well, including the one of us.
No, you voted. Stop it.
I got a half voted. But there's a great, great list of horror movies they're going to start rolling out. And we are very thrilled to be the co-host for the opening night, which is going to be, actually, it's going to be on Valentine's Day.
Yeah,
which
it's
is
the night after the next Fright Club.
Right, so we'll be here like 2 nights in a row, which is, the usual
I was gonna say,
for us. But
what?
The opening of Horror 101 is going to be Candyman,
Woo-hoo!
Which is a great one to start off with. And it's, it's a love story
It
from
is.
a different point of view,
It is
I guess.
a love
The love
story.
of bees. And so it's going to be fun, but it's going to be a fantastic program. By all means, we've got a link on our website and our Facebook page about the entire lineup. It's going to be so great. I mean, this is already such a great horror community here at the Gateway, and this is only going to solidify it. So it's Horror 101. It's going to be fantastic. Hopefully you can make it out for as many as you can. And there's going to be some cross things.
Pollination.
Yes, cross
Well, we're going to be here a lot
pollination
anyway,
with Fright Club.
And we're going to lobby to introduce a couple. So they're
Right.
showing my all-time favorite movie, Silence of the Lambs. They're showing my second all-time favorite movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I'm just going to introduce them whether they want me to or not.
We can't get rid of her. But yeah, look it up. We
Who's
hope to
that
see
lady
you.
again? Get her to sit down.
It's going to be awesome. Horror 101. So also, what else we want to say? Thanks to we've been getting some nice love on some of the social medias. We got to say thank you to a couple of people. Matthew Bush, who was so supportive of this film series and just film series all over Columbus.
Yeah, he really is. He's just a huge supporter, really, of Columbus and film, and he's awesome. So check
and
him out if you can.
also Terrified Typist.
We're hoping he came. If you didn't come,
is
well
Terrified
then,
Typist here?
No.
Tonight?
Okay.
Okay. Well, maybe he'll come in late, but
yeah.
He's joined the Fright Clubbers here on Twitter at Fright Club Pod. So thanks for his support as well. Okay, so we're talking about sci-fi, horror, meeting of the minds.
We are.
What are the rules? Anything besides they have to be a little bit of both?
That's really all. They have to be a little bit of both. And there are like several different camps, right? You got your sort of alien invasion camp and your mad scientist camp. Sometimes those kind of fall in together. So what I really was looking for were films that, so like Frankenstein, for example, obviously it's your top sort of mad scientist movie, but it's really, you bring cadavers back to life. There's sci-fi there, but it's gothic horror. You know what I mean? So when I was going sort of the mad scientist route, I was really looking for something that was more of a traditional sci-fi storyline that was handled in a horror kind of a vein. So because there are millions and millions and millions of choices for this.
Yeah.
So I was trying to narrow it down in some way. So I really was looking for something that was at least equal parts, if not even maybe more sci-fi than horror.
And by the way, this is where we would say that if we were still doing the theme songs, tonight's would probably be, from Rocky Horror, science fiction double feature?
I would think so,
That'd be a good one?
Yeah.
Okay, so just hum
you
that.
You never go wrong there.
Hum that to yourselves. That would be tonight's theme song because we don't want the lawyers coming down on us at all. All right, so we've got 5 to talk about. One to just talk a little bit about because we're going to show it tonight, and we never want to spoil anything. And by the way, we've seen a few new faces here tonight, which is awesome. If anybody doesn't have a Fright Club button and would like one, come down after the movie, and we'll give you one. We've got a few left. I'd love for you to have one of those. All right, so we'll start off at number 5, going back a ways. This is from 1956. A small-town doctor learns that the population of his community is being replaced by emotionless alien duplicates. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Listen to me. Please listen. If you don't, if you won't, if you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet, bringing a new dimension in terror to the giant Super Scope screen.
Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
I love that we start with this because it really sets up a theme through much of this countdown. We've got either remakes or movies that were remade.
Yep.
And this is, of course, has been remade, but this is the classic version of the story, I think. And it's really effective, especially in that, watching that trailer again. Great black and white with the light and the shadow, and makes everything so ominous. And it's a great story.
It was a close call because the 1978 remake is awesome and in a lot of ways scarier. And then in 98, The Faculty is basically a remake of this as well.
Yeah.
And it's a full-blown horror film and a ton of fun. So they're all worth checking out. I went with the original primarily because it is so original. It was such a unique concept at the time. And one of the things that I think is a great thing about sci-fi, especially sort of the paranoid sci-fi, is how differently you can read them. Like this was read as sort of, pro-McCarthyism and anti-McCarthyism. And it's one of those things where, and it's funny because Don Siegel's a director who went on to do a lot of stuff with John Wayne and with Clint Eastwood, and he's a registered Republican, and he wasn't trying to make a political film, but he did, because you almost can't help it. And the same thing happens, I think, with zombie films, is that it's so easy to read them, to read conspiracy and metaphor into a zombie film. And this film seems so right with metaphor. But one of the things I think, there are two things I think really work for it. It was a very unique and interesting way to do the alien invasion because of the sort of pods. And so it wasn't monsters that show up. It was this more insidious thing. And then something that even when I was little and would watch it and then went on to terrify me when the Nightmare on Elm Street movies come out is that the only way to fight them is to not go to sleep. There's nothing I would rather have to not do than not go to sleep. I love sleeping so very much.
She does.
Now, I would go without food for days if it would keep these things from turning me into a plant person. But sleeping, I don't know. I would not last that long.
It'd be a short movie.
It would be a short movie.
But one of the things I think it's interesting to note about this version is how much it was changed from its original, well, before they did test screenings, because originally there was a lot of humor in it. And the test screenings didn't get it. They were laughing at the wrong places, and the producers were just scared of that, worried about that, because it was supposed to be a scary movie, and that they wanted all the humor struck from it, which ended up happening. And then they also insisted on the optimistic ending at the end. The director, Don Siegel, wanted the ending that was picked up by the remake in the 70s, which I think is more effective.
I do too.
If you ask me.
I do too.
But they insisted on the optimistic ending of the original. But still, this one is a great molding.
Donald Sutherland.
Yeah, that iconic version of Donald Sutherland is in his perm. But this is a great molding of sci-fi and horror from 1956. Number 5 on our list, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Moving up to number 4, another one. This was not the original, but this is a remake of a classic from 1986. A brilliant but eccentric scientist begins to transform into a giant man-fly hybrid after one of his experiments goes way wrong. The fly.
There is a limit, even to the imagination.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
Oh no, what's happening to me? Am I dying? Oh no. A fly got into the transmitter pod with me that first time when I was alone.
I'm afraid!
Don't be afraid!
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Help me. Please, help me.
This is David Cronenberg's remake, one of our favorite directors, and as he will do, he really amped up the body horror, the grisly nature of this story from the original.
Yeah, the original, the Vincent Price version, is sweet and fun and creepy and sad. and a perfectly solid sci-fi film. But yeah, David Cronenberg went nuts with it in the best way. And it's funny. I mean, he was bound to be on here. His horror, especially his early, is all very mad scientist-y. And this is, I think, the most of a crossover into sci-fi.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
definitely a horror film.
Yeah, oh sure.
But
yeah.
it's and that's the thing is it was definitely his most mainstream film to date when he made it, and I think also his most sympathetic. I don't think that most of his films, there's not a huge character arc in a lot of David Cronenberg movies, and I don't think that the audience is really asked to empathize that much. But in this case, the Goldblum character, and eventually Brundlefly, I mean, Seth Brundle is so, especially for like a big nerd, so sympathetic, which is interesting in a Cronenberg film. And toward the end, even though he's clearly the villain and he's lost his mind and he's looking to kill and reform this whole family and one big giant slothy monster, you just feel so awful for him.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that about keeping Brundlefly sympathetic, because one of the scenes that was cut was when Seth put into the pod a cat and one of the baboons, and then apparently the
one
thing
baboon
that
was
came
enough?
out of it,
Oh.
Brundle ends up beating him to death, and for the producers and test audiences thought that was then you weren't sympathetic to him anymore. Once he had done that,
Right.
you've kind of lost your audience and lost your sympathetic nature of the character, so you can understand why they cut that,
Right.
keeping that character sympathetic. But it's a great way to make the sci-fi portion of the story so horrific, because it is. I remember seeing it in the theater the first time, and when he, disintegrates and pieces of him start falling off, and he looks at himself in the mirror, and then she hugs him. I think the whole audience at the time went, ugh, they recoiled, audibly when she hugged him like that, because it's very, very creepy, and yet keeps the sci-fi nature, but really makes it so much more horrific.
Do you know what I think? I have a weird theory. I've not shared this. We've talked about this movie many times, and I've talked before about how much the two of them look alike. But I think that was done intentionally. So the more that Goldblum's character disintegrates, when she's there, you are subconsciously reminded of what he was like when he was healthy, and it makes you sadder for him. I think, because they look alike. They really look weirdly alike, those two.
This really probably launched the legend of Goldblum, right? Because before he got this role, he was just kind of a bit player.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't think the producers wanted him for the role, because he wasn't a quote-unquote star at the time. And then once he got it, he lobbied for Gina Davis because they were dating.
And they looked exactly alike.
They did. That's a theory. We'll have to run that by Cronenberg next time we're chatting on the Lanai. But that is number 4. It's still definitely one of my favorites from 1986, the David Cronenberg version of The Fly. Moving it up to number 3, and it's the one we're going to see tonight, so we won't talk much about it. It's from 2007. A man accidentally gets into a time machine, travels back in time nearly an hour, finding himself will be the first of a series of disasters of unforeseeable consequences, time crimes.
¿Qué es todo esto? ¿Puedes esconderte ahí?
Okay, we're off in an empty theater, as we like to do, to talk about the movie that we're going to see tonight, and I'm looking forward to the reaction for Time Crimes, because we've seen it a couple of times, and I remember my reaction the first time.
Right.
This is just nuts. And it's one of those where you just go around in your head, and I guess, I don't know if you're trying to find a way where they made a mistake in the logic, and then, I don't know about you, but my head just starts hurting. But I don't think they did. I think the integrity of the device holds up.
I think so, too. And I also think it's one of those movies where you just have to sort of let go and follow along with the first time you watch it, and that's what and then immediately think, I have to watch this again. Like, once you know the whole story, then you're like, okay, I got to watch it again and see what happens. And I think that it's just ingenious. The way that the story unfolds it really is so well crafted, so slyly crafted.
Yeah, because the first time through, you start seeing these weird things happening, and then it goes back and picks them up. Oh, that's why that happened, because we're going back in time again. It's almost, in a weird way, it's almost like a reverse Hangover. Where they're trying to piece together,
right.
But in this one, Hector, he just has to keep piecing it together, and then it just gets more complicated, as it would, even though he only went back in time about, an hour or so. it's got some dark humor in spots, but I think it's a bittersweet take on how we sabotage ourselves, and then how we sometimes look for people to pay for our mistakes.
Right. Yeah. It does have there's one particularly just very sad moment that you're like, yeah.
Did that have to happen?
Yeah. You're like, oh,
because
that's too bad.
Yeah. His looking for a way out of a predicament. Yeah. That is so much of it is self-inflicted. But also I love, there's a couple little wink, wink, nudge, nudges in this movie, and the first one is the girl on the bicycle's T-shirt. It's of Schrodinger's cat, which, if you're familiar with that, it's a very famous thought problem.
Yeah,
that it basically comes down to, can this cat be simultaneously alive and dead?
Right.
And it's one of those that, if you're not into theoretical philosophy, will literally make your head hurt the more you read about the problem. And this one kind of falls in that line. Yeah. Plus, also, there's a sign the first time you go through the, I guess, laboratory of the scientist, played by Nacho, by the way, the filmmaker, which is great. There's a little sign on there that says, where it says time machine configuration, there's a little note that says, please pay for your software, which makes you think this guy is running this entire thing off unlicensed software, which is awesome. But yeah, so there's little bits of little dark humor and the wink winks, but there is, like we were saying, with what happens, the sad part that happens, there's some bittersweet a take on regret and things like that, if you really want to dive into it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but there are two things about this that I think you can see again and again in sort of a nightmarish way. And so one is this concept of a doppelganger, right? Where like in sort of a comedy or something, you're just like, I wish I could clone myself. But man, horror movies or movies that are, for some reason, and it makes me think of the movie Enemy, which was great, right?
Well, if you think this is hard to follow, Enemy will really make your ears bleed. I mean, my Lord. But this just terror of the doppelganger, this terror of losing your identity and losing who you are and watching somebody else live your life, and then the violence that could bring you to. I love the way that plays out in this movie. And then the other is this idea of a time loop, which you see in a bunch of different spots in The Endless. Yeah. Yeah, and even the one that came before The Endless.
Right. Resolution. In
fact, there's a line in this movie about keeping someone in chains, and that made me think of Resolution.
Yeah.
But then you're right. The Endless maybe speaks to it a little bit more clearly.
Yeah.
This time loop thing going on.
Yes.
And by the way, if you haven't seen either of those movies,
do it.
See them.
Yeah.
They're tied together in their own universe, which in a very, very intelligent way, which is very cool. But back to this. The time loop. The doppelganger is interesting to consider because you're right. In movies like this, non-comedies, non-duplicity. What was that with Michael Keaton? The one where there's a bunch of him. Anyway.
I don't think I want to know.
There was one. Remember there was one with Michael Keaton where there's like 100 of him running
around.
Multiplicity. Thank you. When it's these serious borderline horror movies, they immediately, the doppelganger must be killed.
Right.
Must be hunted down. Yeah. And that's a really possibly philosophical theme to dive into.
Oh, that's got to be. Yeah. That's got to be like, Freudian or, pre-Freudian. That's got to be just some sort of a deep primal fear that I think that this movie touches on, not in the way that Enemy does. Enemy just dives in.
Oh, my
And then
Lord.
there's the spiders. What?
Yeah.
But this, I love the way this movie treats it. And at the same time, toes that sort of, but if you ever come face to face with, which is you're like, well, how do they know that the world would end? Your world would end. What, why can't you just, hey, it's me. I don't know.
And
I don't know why.
And there's a little bit of that.
Of course, I'm a twin, so I'm very much about whatever, doppelgangers.
And there's a little bit of that, what would you say to your younger self? Knowing what I know now, I would tell my younger self, well, it's only an hour younger self, but even so, you're kind of on that plane, the advice to have a better life and all that.
Well, it's funny because in movies like this, it's the opposite. I'm not going to give my younger self advice. I'm going to come at him with some scissors.
Yeah. But no, where they're going back and they say, look, whatever I say, do this.
Yeah.
And it also, deals with all this stuff. It moves at a pretty good clip.
It really does.
You know?
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't drag at all.
Oh no, and it's not long. It's,
No, it's not
it's
long.
under 90 minutes.
Exactly,
And
so-
it's just it's just fun.
It is. I think I'm really looking forward to the reaction. I know there's a few people in the crowd tonight that have seen it and like it. Well,
Most
because
people
they're
have
back,
not, yeah.
but most people have not. So it should be a good one. Before we head back in there, if you haven't checked out our other podcast, please do. We've got another podcast called The Screening Room, which we do every week. It's live every Friday, or at the very least Saturday morning, where we review all the new movies, just the new releases in theaters, regardless of genre.
And the new and home entertainment.
And on home entertainment, too. So check those out. And if you like one or both of these podcasts, feel free to leave a review.
Please do.
We'd appreciate that. Always do. And we'll give you a shout out. So, all right, with that, let's get back in there and see us some time crimes.
How many of you have seen it?
Couple? 3 or 4. Okay.
All right.
Or
So a
few.
lot of people haven't. I love when that happens.
It's so great that a lot of you haven't seen it because I think you're going to like it a lot.
And we're not going to tell you anything about it.
Except that it's from a writer-director that we love, and whose first name is Nacho.
Nacho Villolongo.
Nacho Villolongo.
Who did?
He did Colossal just a couple of years ago with Anne Hathaway, which is really good. Really enjoyed it. If you like this one, you might want to look that one up. He's also in the movie. And, it's time travel. Is this the one? We had a friend a few years ago, it might have been about this one, who saw a time travel movie and was just kind of poo-pooing it because he was like, that's not how time travel would work.
It was
I'm
Looper.
like, it was a Looper.
I know,
okay.
I'm
like,
like, please do tell.
Please,
how
doctor.
exactly does time travel
tell us how
work?
time travel would work. But it just has a lot of fun with the whole concept. And
yeah,
the,
you know, of all of the topics, time travel, I think, is the most sci-fi of the topics on the list. I mean, it's something that you don't see in horror very often, right? Army of Darkness, all right, a little time travel there. Predestination, that's kind of a time travel movie, but I thought it was fun that they were able to make it so creepy, but at the same time, it's such one of the things that I think time travel movies have going for them is how hard they are to follow, and at the end, if they make sense, you're like, of course.
and this one is, at the heart of it, you could say it's maybe a look about self-inflicted madness, kind of, you know, how we drive ourselves crazy with things, and you'll see what we mean as the movie goes on. But at one point, I don't think anymore, but at one point, there was talk of an American remake starring Tom Cruise. So I don't think I hope that's kind of fizzled out. Kind of hope it has.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
You know, but we'll see. But we're going to watch that here in just a few minutes, and I look forward to hearing your reactions. That's Time Crimes, number 3. The clock's running, so we got to get up to number 2. One of the classics from 1982. A research team in Antarctica is hunted by a strange, shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims. It's The Thing.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
You guys gonna listen to Gary? He can beat one of those things!
We've talked about this one a bunch of times because
For obvious
it fits.
reasons.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
fits so many different topics, and it's such a brilliant movie. But one of the things I've never pointed out before, one of the things I love about the way Carpenter sets this up is that you're with that crew. You're like, why in the hell are they shooting at this sweet dog? And when he jumps up and licks him, you're like, well, he is a sweet dog. He's not like a mean dog, and look how pretty he is. And then the way that he slowly turns that on its head is one of the 1,000 absolutely genius things about this movie.
Yeah, this is another remake. This is John Carpenter's version of the Thing from Another World, which was 1951. And one of the things that trailer reminded me of the one actor, Donald Moffat. He just died just a few years ago.
Yeah,
just
this
passed
year.
away.
Just this year.
Was it just
Mhm.
just this year? That's right. I meant to say just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But it's a great cast. It's different from the story and the original movie. It's an all-male cast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the only you hear a female voice, which actually turns out to be Adrienne Barbeau as the voice of the computer. Of course, she was married to John Carpenter at the time, but it's so claustrophobic and cold and creepy, and it just adds such an atmosphere of dread about it.
It does.
And it's so well directed in that way, and it's interesting that at the time it wasn't really a hit. It wasn't
No.
really a success. It's grown to the cult status that it enjoys today over the years, but at the time people just kind of shrugged at it.
Yeah, I think they were bothered by a lot of things about it. I think they were bothered by, especially if you think about when it came out, I think people were bothered by the ambiguous ending, which didn't really happen that often, especially in horror at that time, much thanks to the massive success of Carpenter's previous film. which laid a blueprint for the horror to come after it. And the fact that he went so wildly away from the source material and then just away from sort of predictable horror film endings, I think had a lot to do with it. But one of the things I think that makes this really stand out as a sci-fi film is the just pervasive paranoia, which I think is one of the main elements in sci-fi, certainly sci-fi horror crossovers, is just this idea of paranoia and who can you trust. I'm not sure that there is a movie that captures that as well as this does.
No, but you pointed out of a few that kind of over the last few years have played on the same types of themes. Even if you go back to just last year, A Quiet Place.
Yeah.
You know, you have
the
some
whole idea
sort of the
of
same.
the alien invasion, an interesting take on the alien invasion. Obviously, A Quiet Place had that. One that I love is Attack the Block. Which I'm not sure I would call it a horror film. There are people who do, but it's a thriller. It's a sci-fi film. John Boyega, the first time we saw him in anything, he was so magnificent.
And even especially though, if you're thinking of the paranoia angle, The Mist.
Oh yeah,
where it has that paranoia angle to it with creatures. But
right.
Yeah, there's so much now to love about this. And I think you mentioned the ambiguous ending. Who between Kurt Russell and Keith David, is a human at the end. And I think it was really interesting that it was in 2002. There was a game that came out in 2002 called The Thing, and John Carpenter endorsed that game as canon. And in the game, they're both human at the end, which I thought that he would step out. It was interesting that he would step out and endorse a game like that as canon, but he did. Now, whether he still does today, I don't know. But it's still such a great ambiguous ending. You can look for all sorts of clues as to who is and who isn't. But and then you know what? The sequel/prequel that came out, I thought was pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't compare to this.
No, but
it pays a good homage to it. It's got a great cast, and it's enjoyable.
It is enjoyable, especially when the end comes and you realize what they're actually doing. So that is number 2 on our list from 1982, The Thing, in our sci-fi horror countdown. Moving up to number 1, another classic from 1979. Really needs no introduction. It's Alien.
Seems we have intercepted a transmission of unknown origin.
Human.
Unknown. What the hell is that?
How do we kill it?
You can't.
Oh, God, it's moving right towards you. Move, get out of there.
It's hard to beat that movie, and as sequels go, Aliens is about as great a sequel as you're going to have. But the reason that it's not, Alien is a horror movie. You're trapped. You can't. It's basically, and I'm not the first person. It's a haunted house movie in space, right? You can't get away from this thing, except that instead of being a ghost, it's an alien that spits acid. Oh my God! And it's got that face hugger, hand, vagina. Oh my God! I love this movie.
That's interesting because writer Dan O'Bannon has said that early on in the development of the script, he ran into kind of a writer's block with another co-writer he was working with, and they couldn't figure out, okay, how do we get the monster, the alien, onto the ship? And one of them said to the other just as it fucks one of them. And that went to the idea of the face hugger. But then the more they got into it, they wanted to make sure, because of the implications, they wanted to make sure that first victim was a man.
Sure.
Because it makes total sense. And you hear time and again how just off-the-cuff comments through creative collaborators can result in genius ideas.
Yeah, it's
and
absolutely
that face hugger,
genius.
Man.
Oh my God, it's absolutely genius, and and it carries over everything about the alien, everything about the egg, and then everything about the spaceship. It's so like a tin can. You don't feel safe on it, even if there's no alien there. And the whole cast is great. Harry Dean Stanton, oh, what a sad sack. You're like, what are you doing out there by yourself? Clearly, you're the next guy to go. Oh, and John Hurt, shut up. Nancy Cartwright, there's a screecher. She can screech.
She can.
Everything about this movie is just so perfectly put together, which eventually we would recognize as being because the director was a genius. But at the time, I think this really came out of left field.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think a lot of the look of it and so much of the technical aspects came because Dan O'Bannon had been hired to work on the ill-fated Jodorowsky production of Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And when that folded, he took O'Bannon took a lot of that creative team with him, including Geiger, whose designs led to the monster. So it's weird how the collapsing of one movie, especially one that's become shrouded in legend now, like Jodorowsky's Dune, kind of led indirectly, or in some cases directly, to the classic that is Alien. Because you're right, it's a straight up horror movie that's rooted in sci-fi.
Right. Well, and of course, Dan O'Bannon wrote Return of the Living Dead, so he was a horror guy. He's a horror guy anyway, and it's funny to me to think that a movie that is so very, very, very serious as this one is came from the same mind as the Return of the Living Dead, but still.
Well, and
good for you, Dan O'Bannon.
And you'll love this because, of course, it was directed by Ridley Scott.
Yes.
Brilliantly. And O'Bannon pointed out to Ridley Scott and producer Walter Hill, who neither one admitted they were really that up on horror movies, that they should watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to get the feeling of the intensity of the scenes that he was looking for. When
everybody should watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So that's a great way to lead into what we're going to see tonight. So Alien from 1979 tops on our list of sci-fi horror movies. So we've got one to watch here, Time Crimes, in just a few minutes. This podcast will be edited, although not much to fix in post tonight. I think
that's because they didn't have any Miller Lite, so I'm drinking pop.
That could be. This will be fixed up and probably be out on the usual podcast platforms on Monday. It'll be Fright Club. Of course, you can find it on our website as well, which is madwolf.com. What else? What are we looking forward to? We talked about Horror 101, which is coming up.
Yep.
The next Fright Club Live is going to be back here the night before the
Wednesday,
opening
the 13th
of February, and
February
we will be
13th.
watching
The Love Witch.
We're
going to watch The Love Witch, and we're going to do a podcast, Looking for Love, which is the song we won't be able to play when we start it, by the way.
All right, so looking forward to that.
The next podcast, the one in between that isn't live, is going to be, we always do this, Skeletons in the Closet. So the Oscar nominees will come out, and then we will do a podcast of the skeletons in their closets, the bad horror movies that the Oscar nominees have made.
Because they always have.
Oh, my God, yes. So everybody root for Ben Foster so I can talk about Pandorum, because God, does it suck. And then we're going to be, our co-host is going to be Corey Metcalf, who is also the host of Golden Spiral Media's Rewatch podcast. So if you don't listen to that, give him a listen.
Good stuff. So until then, get in touch if you can. Easy to find us at Fright Club Pod on Twitter or at Mad Wolf Columbus on Facebook and Instagram. So we're going to watch Time Crimes here in just a few. Until next time, she is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And this is the Fright Club Podcast.